Yeah. What's going on, family? We back again. Black is Gold, episode 5. You know what I mean? We highlighting the great, the inspiring, you know what I'm saying? True trailblazer at a time where trailblazing would cost you a heavy, heavy price. We going over no other than Frederick Douglass, okay? Now, let me give a quick shout out to the homie Rush. Salute, salute, salute. You know what I'm saying? So look, I'm not gonna be on here long, y'all. I got some stuff to do. You know what I mean? Brother got some laundry and other stuff to do. So I can't be on here long with y'all, man. You know what I mean? I would be, but I can't. All right. And then plus I got a bunch of stuff I'm doing this upcoming week. So bear with me, y'all, okay? Bear with me. Now, we're gonna get into the life of Frederick Douglass. We're gonna do this quick. All right. The link is pinned. You know what to do if y'all gonna come up here. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, y'all know what it is. So listen. All right. Frederick Douglass, born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, didn't know that. Born in February 1817 or 1818, they don't know because back then it was hard to figure out. Through February 20th, 1895, was an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. Wow. So not only was he a reformer, he was an abolitionist as well. So he was really, 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 doing a lot. Man, got to give a shout out to this person, man. Wonderful person. You know what I mean? Definitely a great sister. Ramadan, thank you, sister, for pulling up. Thank you for always supporting. Appreciate you. She said, we appreciate you sharing your energy with us always. Thank you, family. Appreciate you. Ramadan, one day, you got to come up, though. We got to come up. You got to share with us who you are. And I'm gonna interview you on our network. I am. I know you may not be used to doing interviews, but I want you to do an interview and tell us about who you are, tell us about the art that you do, all that. Like I really want you to get into, the experience that you provide for the people and the beautiful art that you do as well. You know what I mean? I appreciate you so much. Thank you for always supporting me in the stream. So yeah, y'all. You know what I mean? It's getting to Frederick Douglass. You know what I'm saying? I know my voice may not be so high right now. I'm trying to rest my voice because I've just been going in on these streams, boy. I tell you, ooh, man. After escaping from slavery, right? So now, not only did he help to fight against slavery, but he actually escaped, right? This brother escaped slavery. Okay, so if you escaped slavery back then, trust me. You was definitely, you was definitely a fortunate person, trust me, beyond blessed. After escaping from slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, becoming famous for his oratory and incisive anti-slavery writings. Wow, he was a writer as well. Wow, amazing. You know what I mean? Remember, we wasn't allowed to read and write back then, so for him to be a writer, definitely, this brother was ahead of his time. Accordingly, he would describe abolitionists in his time as a living counterexample to slaveholders. Arguments that slaves lacked the intellectual capacity, I like that they use the word intellectual, no pun intended, to function as independent American citizens. Northerners at the time found it hard to believe that such a great orator had once been a slave. Wow. You heard that before. Oh, he speaks so well. Where are you from? They always say that when we have some type of education about us. It was in response to this disbelief that Douglass wrote his first autobiography. Wow. His first autobiography, okay? So there's probably, he wrote 3 autobiographies, okay? 3, all right? Describing his experience as a slave and his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave that came out in 1845, which became a bestseller and was influential in promoting the cause of abolition. That was his second book, My Bondage and My Freedom. 1855, he came out with that one. Following the Civil War. Civil War, that's when the North fought the South. You know what I mean? That's how we kind of got all the nations together and all that. Slaves, with the Emancipation Proclamation. We don't get into all that. Douglass was an active campaigner for the rights of free slaves and wrote his last autobiography, Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. First published in 1881 and revised in 1892. 3 years before his death. His transition, 3 years before his transition. The book covers his life up to those days. Douglass also actively supported women's suffrage. Wow. Okay, so he was fighting for women's rights way before the whole women's movement began. And he held several public offices. Wow, that's another big thing. He wasn't holding no public offices back then. By this permission, Douglas became the first African American nominated for Vice President of the United States. Wow. As a running mate of Victoria Woodhull on the Equal Rights Party ticket. Wow. Douglas believed in dialogue and in making alliances across racial and ideological divides, as well as in the liberal values of the U.S. Constitution. When radical abolitionists under the motto, "No union with slaveholders," wow, criticized Douglas' willingness to engage in dialogue with slave owners, he replied, "I will unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong." Wow. That reminds me of the old saying, if you don't, if you stand for something, you don't stand for nothing at all. Man. All right, so let's get into his life, man. So I'm gonna highlight a few things about his life. All right. So I'm gonna get into his life as a slave. I'm gonna talk about how he got free. I'm gonna talk about him being an abolitionist and a preacher. You know what I mean? I'm gonna talk about the Civil War years and the Reconstruction era. All right. Now once I cover the Reconstruction era, after that, y'all, you know what I mean? I'm gonna end it. All right. So let's get into this, y'all. All right. And remember, this is via Wikipedia. I'm not sharing it on the screen because I ain't trying to catch a charge from YouTube. You already know that. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born as a slave on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County, Maryland. The plantation was between Hillsborough and Cordova. His birthplace was likely his grandmother's cabin east of Champer's Corner and west of Tuckahoe Creek. In his first autobiography, Douglas stated, "I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it." Wow, that's crazy. He didn't even know how old he was. In successive autobiographies, he gave more precise estimates of when he was born, his final estimate being 1817. However, based on the extant records of Douglas' former owner, Henry Anthony, historian Dickinson J. Preston, determined that Douglas was born in February 1818. The exact date of his birth is unknown. She chose to celebrate February 14th, Valentine's Day, as his birthday, remembering his mother called him her little Valentine. Oh, okay. Now let me go down. Okay. All right, so let's get to his life as a slave, all right? All right, so early learning experience, okay? The Auld family. At the age of 6, Douglas was separated from his grandparents and moved to Yea House Plantation, where Aaron Anthony worked as an overseer. After Anthony transcended in 1826, Douglas was given to Loretta Auld, wife of Thomas Auld, who sent him to serve Thomas' brother Hugh Auld and his wife Sophia Auld in Baltimore. Shout out to Baltimore. From the day he arrived, Sophia saw to it that Douglas was properly fed and clothed, and that he slept in a bed with sheets and a blanket. Wow. Douglas described her as a kind and tender-hearted woman who treated him as she supposed one human being ought to treat another. Douglas felt that he was lucky to be in a city where he said slaves were almost free men, compared to those on plantations. When Douglas was about 12, Sophia Auld began teaching him the alphabet. Hugh Auld disapproved of the tutoring, feeling that literacy would encourage slaves to desire freedom. Wow, that's crazy. Douglas later referred to this as the first decidedly anti-slavery lecture he had ever heard. "Very well, thought I," wrote Douglas. "Knowledge unfits a child to be a slave." Wow, that's a big quote right there. I instinctively assented to the proposition, and from that moment I understood the direct pathway from slavery to freedom. Under her husband's influence, Sophia came to believe that education and slavery were incompatible, and one day snatched the newspaper away from Douglas. She stopped teaching him altogether and hid all potential reading materials, including her Bible, from him. Wow. In his autobiography, Douglas related how he learned to read from white children in the neighborhood and by observing the writings of the men with whom he worked. Wow. So once they open that door to knowledge, you step right in. You know what I mean? And see, we have access to knowledge all the time, and look what we do with it. You know what I'm saying? Something to think about. Douglas continued secretly to teach himself to read and write. He later often said knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. As Douglas began to read newspapers, pamphlets, political materials, and books of every description, this new realm of thought led him to question and condemn the institution of slavery. In later years, Douglas credited the Columbian Orator, an anthology that he discovered at about age 12, with clarifying and defining his views on freedom and human rights. First published in 1797, the book is a classroom reader containing essays, speeches, and dialogues since his students in learning, reading, and grammar. He later learned that his mother had also been literate, about which he would later declare. All right, he gave a quote about that. I'm not going to read that quote. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's get to William Freeland. When Douglass was hired out to William Freeland, he got eventually more than 30 male slaves on Sundays, and sometimes even on weeknights in a Sabbath literacy school. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Edward Covey. In 1833, Thomas All took Douglass back from Hugh. Okay, as a means of punishing Hugh, Douglass later wrote, Thomas sent Douglass to work for Edward Covey, a poor farmer who had a reputation as a slave breaker. Whew. He whipped Douglass so frequently that his wounds had little time to heal. Man, wow. Douglass later said the frequent whippings broke his body, soul, and spirit. The 60-year-old Douglass finally rebelled against the beatings, however, and fought back. After Douglass won a physical confrontation, Covey never tried to beat him again. Yeah, that's right. You know what I mean? He finally put some boots to his ass and the whipping stopped. Recount his beatings at Covey's farm in the narrative, The Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Douglass described himself as a man transformed into a brute. Still, Douglass came to his physical fight with Covey as life transforming. Introduced the story in his autobiography as such. You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man. Woo! Man. That's deep right there. All right, let's get from slavery to freedom. So this is when he gets free. Douglass first tried to escape from Freeland, who had hired him from his owner, but was unsuccessful. In 1837, Douglass met and fell in love with Anna Murray, a free black woman in Baltimore, about 5 years his senior. Her free status strengthened his belief in the possibility of gaining his own freedom. Murray encouraged him and supported his efforts by aid and money. Let me give a shout out to, take a pause for the cause, Moments with Mickey Red. Mickey, what up? You know what I mean? Thanks for stopping in. Look, y'all, follow Mickey Red on all social media platforms. Show some love, all right? Give her that support. Y'all know what it is. Thanks for coming through, family. On September 3rd, 1838, Douglass successfully escaped by boarding a northbound train of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. All right, so back then, y'all know that they had to take the railroad to get from place to place. It wasn't like it was now. It wasn't where you could jump on a plane and you just take off. No, the railroad was everything back then, okay? If you wasn't rocking the railroad, you wasn't going nowhere. The area where he boarded was thought to be a short distance east of the train depot, in a recently developed neighborhood between the modern neighborhoods of Harbor East and Little Italy. The depot was at President and Fleet Streets, east of the basin of the Baltimore Harbor on the northwest branch of the Patapsco River. Research cited in 2021, however, suggests that Douglass, in fact, boarded the train at a Cannon depot of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad on Boston Street in the Canton neighborhood of Baltimore further east. Young Douglass reached Havre de Grace, Maryland, Harford County in the northeast corner of the state along the southwest shore of the Susquehanna River, which followed into the Chesapeake Bay. All of this placed him only some 20 miles from Maryland, from the Maryland-Pennsylvania state line. It was easier to continue by rail through Delaware, another slave state. Dressed in a sailor's uniform provided to him by Murray, who also gave him part of her savings to cover his travel costs, he carried identification papers and protection papers that he had obtained from a free black seaman. Wow. So, you know what I mean? He and see, look, his woman wasn't worried about him being a provider and all this other stuff. Nah, she was worried about, you know what I mean? Do what you got to do. Be on your purpose. She supported his purpose. You know what I'm saying? So, you know what I mean? Because that's what mattered back then. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes, we forget, and maybe we need to have more of that thought process of, supporting each other. You know what I mean? And stop looking at all these gender roles and all this other garbage, man. It don't mean nothing. So let me keep going. Douglass crossed the wide Susquehanna River by the railroad steam ferry of Havre de Grace to Perryville on the opposite shore in Cecil County. They continued by train across the state line to Wilmington, Delaware, a large port of the head of the Delaware Bay. From there, because the rail line was not yet completed, he went by steamboat along the Delaware River northeast to the Quaker city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, an anti-slavery stronghold. Wow. Okay, that's something new. I didn't know Philadelphia was an anti-slavery stronghold. I didn't know that. And that's another thing. Boats was another form of travel back then. You know what I mean? Outside of the railroads. He continued to the safe house of noted abolitionist David Ruggles in New York City. Shout out to New York. His entire journey to freedom took less than 24 hours. Douglass later wrote of his arrival in New York City, "I have often been asked how I felt first I found myself on free soil, and my readers may share the same curiosity. There is scarcely anything in my experience about which I could not give a more satisfactory answer. A new world had opened up upon me. If life is more than breath and a quick round of blood, I lived more in one day than a year of my slave life. It was a time of joyous excitement which words can but tamely describe. In a letter written to a friend soon after reaching New York, I said, it felt as one might feel upon escape from a den of hungry lions." Wow. Anguish and grief, like darkness and rain, may be depicted, but gladness and joy, like the rainbow, defy the skill of pen and pencil. Man, Frederick Douglass was just, oh man, he was so eloquent, so manly. That's just a real man right there, man. It's nothing else to say about it. You know what I mean? Like, even when you look at his pictures, you could tell. You know what I mean? He was no joke with it, man. He was a real man. Once Douglass had arrived, he sent for Mary to follow him from North to New York. She brought the basis for them to set up a home. Wow. They were married on September 15th, 1838, by a Black Presbyterian minister, just 11 days after Douglass had reached New York. At first, they adopted Johnson as their married name to divert attention. Okay, let's get into when he was an abolitionist and a preacher. Let's get into that. The couple settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, an abolitionist center full of former slaves. In 1838, moving to Lynn, Massachusetts in 1841, after meeting and staying with Nathan and Mary Johnson, they adopted Douglass as their married name. Douglass had grown up using his mother's surname of Bailey. After escaping slavery, he had changed his name first to Stanley and then to Johnson. In New Bedford, the letter was such a common name that he wanted one that was more distinctive, and asked Nathan Johnson to choose a suitable surname. Nathan suggested Douglass. After having read the poem, The Lady of the Lake, by Walter Scott, in which two of the principal characters have the surname Douglass. Douglass thought of joining a white Methodist church, but was disappointed from the beginning upon finding out that it was segregated. Later, he joined the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, an independent Black denomination first established in New York City, which counted among its members Sojourner Truth. Y'all know about Sojourner Truth? Read up on her because she is the truth. And Harriet Tubman. You know what I mean? Harriet Tubman definitely. Y'all already know about Harriet Tubman, man. If you don't know about Harriet Tubman, do your research. Both of them might be covered on Black is Gold. I might cover Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. I don't know. You know what I mean? Well, y'all don't know, but I do. He became a licensed preacher in 1839, which helped him to hone his oracle skills. He held various positions, including steward, Sunday school superintendent, and sexton. In 1840, Douglass delivered a speech in Elmira, New York, then a station on the Underground Railroad. And y'all know about the Underground Railroad? Do your research. In which a Black congregation would form years later, becoming the region's largest church by 1940. Wow. Salute to M3. M3 was going on. Good to see you. Good to see you. Excuse me, y'all. Excuse me. Now, I mean, hold on 1 second, y'all. All right, I'm back. Douglass also joined several organizations in New Bedford and regularly attended abolitionist meetings. He subscribed to William Lloyd Garrison's weekly newspaper, The Liberator. He later said that no face and form ever impressed me with such sentiments of the hatred of slavery as did those of William Lloyd Garrison. So deep was this influence that in his last autobiography, Douglass said his paper took a place in my heart second only to the Bible. Garrison was likewise impressed with Douglass and had written about his anti-colonization stance in The Liberator as early as 1839. Hold on, y'all. Douglass first heard Garrison speak in 1841. Excuse me, y'all, at a lecture that Garrison gave in Liberty Hall, New Bedford. At another meeting, Douglass was unexpectedly invited to speak. After telling his story, Douglass was encouraged to become an anti-slavery lecturer. A few days later, Douglass spoke at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society annual convention in Nantucket. Then, 23 years old, Douglass conquered his nervousness and gave an eloquent speech, about his rough life as a slave. While living inland, Douglass engaged in early protests against segregated transportation. In September 1841, at Lynn Central Square Station, Douglass and friend James N. Buffin were thrown off an Eastern Railroad train because Douglass refused to sit in the segregated railroad coach. Wow. Okay, in 1843, Douglass joined other speakers in American Anti-Slavery Society's 100 Conventions Project and a 6-month tour at meeting halls throughout the eastern and midwestern United States. During his tour, slavery supporters frequently accosted Douglass at a lecture in Pendleton, Indiana. An angry mob chased and beat Douglass before a local Quaker family. Wow. The Hardys rescued him. His hand was broken in the attack. It healed improperly and bothered him for the rest of his life. Wow. A stone marker in Falls Park in the Peterson Historic District commemorates the event. In 1847, Douglass explained to Garrison, "I have no love for America. As such, I have no patriotism. I have no country. What country have I? The institution of this country do not know me, do not recognize me as a man." Oof, man. So he didn't even identify himself as an American. He was like, man, bump all that. You know what I mean? I ain't got no country. They ain't treating me right. I don't have a country. So so to give you some background. He then, he travels to Ireland and Great Britain. All right. So he goes over there and now he returns to the United States. Okay. So after returning to the U.S. in 1847, he used $48,612, that's what he used in our money standards of today. But it was basically $500 back then. All right, given to him by English supporters. Douglass started publishing his first abolition newspaper, the North Star, from the basement of the Memorial AME Zion Church in Rochester, New York. Memorial AME Zion Church is definitely another one of them places that's very pivotal in our history. Definitely do your research, y'all. Originally, Pittsburgh journalist Martin Delaney was co-editor, but Douglass didn't feel he brought in enough subscriptions, and they parted ways. The North Star motto was right. The North Star motto was, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren." The AME Church and North Star joined the Freedmen community's vigorous opposition to the mostly white American colonization society and its proposal to seek free Black people to Africa. Douglass also participated in the Underground Railroad. He and his wife provided lodging and resources in their home to move more than 400 escaped slaves. Douglass also soon split with Garrison, who he found unwilling to support actions against American slavery. Earlier, Douglass had agreed with Garrison's position that the Constitution was pro-slavery because of the 3/5 clause. The compromise that provided 60% of the number of slaves would be added to the whole number of the free persons. For the proposal of opportunity congressional seats and protection of the international slavery trade through 1807. Garrison had burned copies of the Constitution to protect his opinion. However, Sanders Spooner published the answer Unconstitutionally of Slavery, which was in 1846, which examined the United States Constitution as an anti-slavery document. Douglass' change of opinion about the Constitution and his splitting from Garrison around 1847 became one of the abolitionist movement's most notable divisions. Douglass angered Garrison by saying that the Constitution could and should be used as an instrument in a fight against slavery. Wow. Okay, so he wrote a letter to his former owner. So let's get to when he's fighting for women's rights, all right? In 1848, Douglass was the only Black person to attend the Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention in upstate New York. Wow. Elizabeth Cady Stanton asked the Assembly to pass a resolution asking for women's suffrage. Salute to Lady E. She said, "What's up? What's going on, Lady E? Good to see you. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you. Many of those present opposed the idea included influential Quakers James and Lucretta Moore. Douglass stood and spoke eloquently in favor of women's suffrage. He said that he cannot accept the right to vote as a black man if women cannot also not claim that right. He suggested that the world would be a better place if women were involved in the political sphere. Wow. You know what I mean? Lady E giving greeting salutations. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And this denial of the right to participate in government, not merely the degradation of women and a perpetual of a great injustice happens, but the maiming and reputation of one half of the moral and intellectual power of the government of the world. After Douglas' powerful words, the attendees passed a resolution. In the wake of the Seneca Falls Convention, Douglas used it as an editorial in the North Star to press the case for women's rights. He recalled the marked ability and dignity of the proceedings and briefly conveyed several arguments of the convention and feminists throughout that time. On the first count, Douglas acknowledged the decorum of the participants in the face of disagreement. In the remainder, he discussed the primary document that emerged from the conference, a declaration of sentiments in the infant feminist cause. Strikingly, he expressed the belief that a discussion of the rights of animals would be regarded with far more complacency than would be a discussion of the rights of women. Wow. And Douglas noted the link between abolitionists and feminism, the overlap between the communities. His opinion as an editor of a prominent newspaper carried weight, and he stated the position of the North Star explicitly. We hold women to be justly entitled to all we claim for man. This letter, written a week after the convention, referring the first part of the paper's slogan, "Right is of no sex." Wow. Okay, so this is after the Civil War, when the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote, was being debated. Douglas split with the Stanton-led faction of the women's rights movement. Douglas supported the amendment, which would grant suffrage to black men. Stanton opposed the 15th Amendment because it limited the expansion of suffrage to black men. She predicted that his passage would delay for decades the cause for women's right to vote. It would be longer than that. Stanton argued that American women and black men should band together to fight for universal suffrage. Wow. And opposed any bill that split the issue. Douglas and Stanton both knew that they were not yet male support for women's rights to vote, but that an amendment giving black men the vote could pass in the late 1860s. Stanton wanted to attach women's suffrage to that of black men so that her cause would be carried to success. Wow. Douglas thought such a strategy was too risky, that there were barely enough support for black men's suffrage. He feared that linking the cause of women's suffrage to that of black men would result in failure for both. Smart man. Douglas argued that white women, already empowered by the social connection of fathers, husbands, and brothers, at least vicariously had to vote. Black women, he believed, would have the same degree of empowerment as white women once black men had the vote. Douglas assured the American women that at no time he had ever argued against women's right to vote. Wow. Wow, this is deep, man. I ain't know Frederick Douglass went through all this, yo. This is wild. Man, so let me so he was a photographer, he did a lot of different things. So let's go to the Civil War years. Let me get into that. All right. So this is before the Civil War, all right? Before the Civil War, by the time of the Civil War, Douglas was one of the most famous black men in the country, known for his orations on the conditions of the black race and on other issues such as women's rights. His eloquence gathered crowds at every location. His reception by leaders in England and Ireland added to his stature. Hold on, y'all. He had been seriously proposed for the congressional seat of his friend and supporter, Gerrit Smith, who declined to run again after his term ended in 1854. Smith recommended to him that he not run because there were strenuous objections from members of Congress. The possibility afflicted some with convulsions, others with panic, more with an astonishing flow of exceedingly select and nervous language, giving vent to all sorts of linguistic enormities. If the House agreed to see him, which was unlikely, all the Southern members would walk out, so the country would finally be split. No black person will serve in Congress until 1870, just after the passage of the 15th Amendment. Wow. All right, so let's get into the fight for the emancipation and suffrage and all. Let's get into that. Douglass and the abolitionists argued that because the aim of the Civil War was to end slavery, African Americans should be allowed to engage in the fight for their freedom. Douglass publicized this view in his newspapers and several speeches after Lincoln had finally allowed black soldiers to serve in the Union Army. Douglass helped the recruitment efforts, publishing his famous broadside Men of Color to Arms on March 21st, 1863. His eldest son, Charles Douglass, joined the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, but was ill for much of his service. Okay, so he joined the army or whatever. Lewis Douglass fought at the Battle of Fort Wagner. Another son, Frederick Douglass Jr., also served as a recruiter. With the North no longer obliged to return slaves to their owners in the South, Douglass fought for equality for his people. Douglass conferred with President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 on the treatment of black soldiers and the plans to move liberated slaves out of the South. President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on January 1st, 1863, declared the freedom of all slaves in Confederate-held territory. Slaves in Union-held areas were not covered because the proclamation was permissible in the Constitution only as a war measure. They were free with the adoption of the 13th Amendment on December 16, 1865. Douglass described the spirit of those awaiting the proclamation. We were waiting and listening as for a bolt from the sky. We were watching. By the dim light of the stars for the dawn of a new day, we were longing for the answer to the agonizing prayers of the centuries. During the U.S. presidential election of 1864, Douglass supported John C. Fremont, who was the candidate of the Abolitionist Radical Democracy Party. Douglass was disappointed that President Lincoln did not publicly endorse suffrage for black freedmen. Douglass believed that since African American men were fighting for the Union and American Civil War, they deserved the right to vote. Man. All right, so Lincoln dies, a bunch of stuff goes on, right? So now we're going to get into the last part, y'all. All right, the Reconstruction era. After the Civil War, Douglass continued to work for equality for African Americans and women. Due to his prominence and activism during the war, Douglass received several political appointments. He served as president of the Reconstruction era Freedmen's Savings Bank. Meanwhile, white insurgents had quickly arisen in the South after the war. Organized at first as a secret vigilante groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, you know about them. Armed insurgencies took different forms. Powerful paramilitary groups, including the White League and the Red Shirts, I heard of both of them, especially the Red Shirts, both active during the 1870s in the Deep South. They operated as a military arm of the Democratic Party, while turning out Republican office holders and disrupting elections. Starting 10 years after the war, Democrats regained political power in every state of the former Confederacy and began to reassert white supremacy. They enforced this by a combination of violence. Late 19th century laws imposed segregation and concerted effort to disenfranchise African Americans. New labor and criminal laws also limited their freedom. Let me give a shout out to the homie Stan Joseph. What's going on, Stan? Good to see you. To combat these efforts, Douglass supported the presidential campaign of Ulysses S. Grant in 1868. In 1870, Douglass started his last newspaper, The New National Era, attempting to hold his country to its commitment to equality. President Grant sent a congressionally sponsored commission accompanied by Douglass on a mission to the West Indies to investigate whether the annexation of Santo Domingo would be good for the United States. Grant believed annexation would help relieve the violent situation in the South by allowing African Americans their own state. Wow. Douglass and the commission favored annexation, but Congress remained opposed to annexation. Douglass criticized Senator Charles Sumner, who opposed annexation, stating that if Sumner continued to oppose annexation, he would regard himself as the worst foe the colored race has had on this continent. Wow. Let me give a shout out to, take a pause for the call, to Daryl Long. Salute, brother. Good to see you. Also, shout out to the twin, you know what I mean? Quantum Love Metaphysician. Good to see you, Quantum. What's going on? You know what I mean? All right, I'm almost done with this. After the midterm elections, Grant signed the Civil Rights Act of 1871, also known as the Klan Act, and the Second and Third Enforcement Acts. Grant used their provision vigorously, suspending habeas corpus in South Carolina and sending troops there and into other states. Under his leadership, over 5,000 arrests were made. Grant's vigor in disrupting the Klan made him unpopular among many whites, but earned praise from Douglass. A Douglass associate wrote that African Americans will ever cherish a grateful remembrance of Grant's name, fame, and great services. In 1872, Douglass became the first African American nominated for vice president of the United States at Victoria Woodhull's running mate on the Equal Rights Party ticket. He was nominated without his knowledge. Wow. So the people nominated him. You see that? You know what I mean? He was the people's champ. You feel me? Douglass neither campaigned for the ticket nor acknowledged that he had been nominated. In that year, he was presidential elector at large for the state of New York and took that state's votes to Washington D.C. He took the state's votes to Washington D.C. However, in early June of that year, Douglas' third Rochester home on South Avenue burned down. Arson was suspected. There was extensive damage to the house, its furnishings, and the grounds. In addition, 16 volumes of the North Star and Frederick Douglass's paper were lost. Douglass then moved to Washington, D.C. Wow, they tried to burn his house down. That's crazy. Throughout the Reconstruction era, Douglass continued speaking, emphasizing the importance of work, voting rights, and actual exercise of suffrage. His speeches for the 25 years following the war emphasized work to counter the racism that was then prevalent in unions. And in a November 15, 1867 speech, he said a man's right rests in three boxes: the ballot box, jury box, and the cartridge box. All right? You know what I mean? The right to bear arms. Okay. Let no man be kept from the ballot box of his color. Then no woman be kept from the ballot box because of her sex. Douglass spoke at many colleges around the country, including Bates College in Lewiston, Maine in 1873. Shout out to Marcus. Good to see you taking pause for the cause. You know what I mean? What's good, Marcus? Was good. In 1881, Douglass delivered at Storer College in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, a speech praising John Brown and revealing unknown information about the relationship, including their meeting in the Banded Stone Quarry in Chambersburg shortly before the raid. Man. So, that's it, y'all. That's Frederick Douglass, man. Know what I mean? Frederick Douglass, man, he held it down for us, man, in the midst of all that. Know what I mean? He was a slave. He fought for his freedom, got his freedom, know what I mean? Became an abolitionist, orator, know what I mean? Socialite, know what I mean? I even say a politician in a sense, you know what I mean? And this is during the time where we couldn't even read it. We wasn't even allowed to read and write, okay? And this man, you know, took the knowledge that he was given and took it to a whole nother level. He was taught a little bit how to read and write, and after that, his mind just took it to a whole different level. And his passion and his love for education, his love for his people took him to a whole nother level. And he couldn't let the injustice that he sees just stand. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. That's one thing that we got to realize. And one thing that we have to really stand on. You know, are we going to let the injustice that we see continue to prevail within our communities or within our families or wherever, workplace, wherever? Or are we going to take a stand, even if we know that, you know, we could really face some harsh penalties, even possibly not even being here no more, transcending. You know what I mean? He ain't let none of that stop him. He just kept going. You know what I mean? Because he had a vision to make something great happen, and he did. You know what I mean? And he wrote several books. He had several newspapers, several documents. You know what I'm saying? To the point where he had so much documentation and so many things that he was writing, they tried to burn the man's house down. You know what I mean? Because he was giving away, you know what I mean, knowledge. He was inspiring people. He was changing people's way of thinking, okay? And that made him a danger to those who wanted to keep us oppressed. You know what I mean? Who wanted to keep us in bondage. You know what I mean? He was freeing us from bondage, you know, through our minds, through our hearts, and through our spirit. And physically, you know, he was like, you know, we gotta, you know, if we gotta get it in, we gotta get it in. You know what I mean? Lady E says we can't take a stance if we can't get on the same page. That's true, Lady E. That's true. You know what I mean? We gotta get on the same page. We may believe in all different things. We may believe in different, you know, religions and all that, but we gotta get on the same page. You know what I mean? Everybody giving their shout outs or whatever. But look, y'all, thank y'all for tuning in to Black is God Episode 5. Okay? With the great, the illustrious, the acclaimed, you know what I mean? the magnificent Frederick Douglass, man. All right, he was definitely a person, that I had to highlight, man. I could not do Black as Gold without talking about the great Frederick Douglass. All right, so listen, y'all, like and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. You know what I mean? That I did it again, and that we did it again. You know what I mean? Because there's nothing. I'm nowhere without y'all. All right. Appreciate y'all, man. Appreciate y'all so much for tuning in. And as you know, our Heavenly Sisters in the Stream, QB always says, especially on this episode, I gotta definitely say it. Be intentional, y'all. All right. Have a good evening, everybody. Later.
DJ.